On September 1, 1943, the Pacific War opened with shock and imbalance. As Japanese carrier aviation struck Pearl Harbor with precision, confidence, and terrifying effectiveness. In the months that followed, Allied pilots encountered an enemy seemingly untouchable, flying in aircraft that climbed faster, turned tighter, and punished hesitation with lethal certainty. At the center of this dominance stood the Mitsubishi Zero, a fighter engineered for range and agility perfectly suited to Pacific distances. Early Allied intelligence underestimated it, assuming fragility would offset performance. Yet combat revealed a machine whose strengths aligned brutally with Japanese tactical doctrine. Japanese pilots entered the war seasoned by China campaigns, trained relentlessly in individual dogfighting skill. Their confidence bordered on ritualized certainty, believing air combat was a contest of spirit and finesse, where superior training and devotion to duty would always overcome heavier, less agile opponents. American and Allied aviators faced the Zero with aircraft designed before its secrets were known, machines emphasizing durability over maneuverability. The Wildcat, brave but burdened, forced pilots to improvise survival tactics, learning painfully that turning with a Zero meant death. Encounters over the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, and Guadalcanal reinforced grim lessons. Allied losses mounted rapidly, squadrons shattered, pilots killed or captured, while Japanese airmen reported victories that confirmed their belief in technological and spiritual supremacy. Survivors described the Zero as ghost-like, appearing suddenly from sun or cloud, firing with devastating accuracy. Its long range allowed Japanese carriers to strike farther, its light construction enabling acrobatics that defied expectations, leaving Allied formations broken and burning. Psychological impact matched physical losses as pilots internalized fear of an unseen advantage. Briefings became somber, confidence eroded, and survival replaced victory as an objective, a dangerous shift in morale during a war demanding aggressive resolve. Yet even amid defeat, careful observers noted patterns. The Zero burned easily when hit, lacked armor, and sacrificed pilot protection for performance. These insights, gathered through blood and wreckage, slowly filtered into tactical thinking and engineering priorities. The thatch weave emerged as a desperate innovation, pairs of Wildcats covering each other against superior turning fighters. It worked imperfectly, demanding discipline and trust, proving that teamwork might counter individual brilliance, though losses remained painfully high. By 1942's end, the Zero's legend dominated Pacific skies, shaping every Allied decision. It was not invincible, but it felt inevitable, a symbol of Japanese mastery and Allied unpreparedness that demanded a decisive systemic response. American planners understood piecemeal adjustments would fail because the problem extended beyond aircraft alone. Training methods, industrial capacity, doctrine, and technology required transformation, acknowledging that air war was becoming an industrial contest rather than a romantic duel. Thus, before 1943 dawned, the Pacific Air War stood at a crossroads. The Zero reigned supreme. Allied pilots adapted under fire, and unseen in American factories, a new answer began forming, designed not to match Japanese skill, but to overwhelm it. In response to hard lessons carved into Pacific skies, American planners turned toward industry with urgency, recognizing courage alone could not reverse mounting losses. Grumman Aircraft Engineering received a mandate: build a fighter able to absorb punishment, dominate engagements, and protect inexperienced pilots facing seasoned Japanese aces. Engineers studied wreckage and combat reports with clinical focus, translating pilot fear into specifications. The new fighter would sacrifice elegance for survivability, accepting weight as protection. Every design choice reflected one principle: the pilot must return alive, even after mistakes made under fire. Grumman's team abandoned incremental improvement, instead pursuing decisive superiority through power and durability. The result was larger, broader, and unapologetically heavy. A machine conceived not for graceful turning contests, but for sustained combat where energy, armor, and firepower defined victory. Central to the design stood the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, delivering 2,000 horsepower reliably. This engine promised climb, speed, and resilience, ensuring the aircraft could dictate engagement terms, disengage when necessary, and absorb damage without catastrophic failure. Armor plating surrounded the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks replaced vulnerability, and redundant systems ensured survival after hits. These features added weight, but Grumman embraced mass as strength. redefining fighter philosophy for a war increasingly shaped by attrition and scale. 650 caliber machine guns filled the wings, delivering devastating concentrated fire. Engineers understood brief firing windows demanded overwhelming lethality, replacing finesse with certainty. When hits landed, destruction followed quickly, reducing prolonged dogfights that favored lighter, more agile opponents. Testing revealed an aircraft forgiving to fly, stable under stress, and predictable during carrier operations. These traits mattered deeply, as the Navy prepared to send thousands of young pilots into combat with limited experience and enormous psychological burdens. The prototype's performance surprised skeptics, showing speed equal to Japanese fighters while climbing faster at altitude. Pilots praised its ruggedness, calling it reassuring rather than elegant, a machine that inspired confidence rather than awe through acrobatics. Grumman's production philosophy emphasized speed and reliability, refining assembly lines even as testing continued. Lessons from earlier aircraft guided manufacturing efficiency, allowing rapid scaling without compromising quality, a crucial advantage against Japan's strained industrial base. Naval leadership recognized the Hellcat as more than an airplane. It embodied doctrinal change. Air combat would favor formation tactics, mutual support, and calculated engagement, moving away from individual duels toward coordinated destruction enabled by robust machines. By late 1942, Hellcats rolled toward deployment as pilots trained intensively on new tactics. Confidence cautiously returned, grounded not in bravado, but preparation, engineering, and numbers that promised balance might soon tilt decisively. As 1943 approached, the American answer took shape fully, forged by necessity and loss. The Hellcat waited on carrier decks, silent and imposing, ready to challenge a legend that had ruled Pacific skies through fear and finesse. Early encounters with the F6F Hellcat triggered amused disbelief among veteran Japanese aviators, who judged aircraft by agility and visual elegance. From a distance, the Hellcat appeared bulky and inelegant, its broad wings and thick fuselage suggesting clumsiness rather than the deadly precision Japanese pilots respected. Japanese fighter doctrine had been shaped by pre-war contests and early victories, where lightweight construction and tight turning radii defined mastery. Pilots trained to dominate through maneuverability, believing skill could overcome numbers. Against this cultural backdrop, the Hellcat looked like an industrial compromise, not a warrior's aircraft. Reports circulated quickly through ready rooms and forward bases, spreading dismissive nicknames and jokes. Some pilots reportedly called it a flying tank, others mocked its size as evidence of American misunderstanding of air combat. Confidence bred contempt, reinforced by years of success against heavier Allied fighters. Combat veterans compared the Hellcat unfavorably to the Zero, whose responsiveness felt like an extension of the pilot's body. The Zero's fragility was accepted as necessary sacrifice, because survival supposedly came from avoiding hits entirely. Protection and armor were viewed as admissions of inferior skill. Initial skirmishes seemed to confirm Japanese assumptions, especially when inexperienced American pilots failed to exploit the Hellcat's strengths. Observing cautious maneuvers and wide turns, Japanese aces interpreted restraint as weakness, reinforcing beliefs that the new American fighter posed little strategic threat. Cultural perceptions also shaped dismissal, as Japanese pilots believed warrior spirit outweighed machinery. American reliance on mass production and engineering was viewed as soulless, incapable of matching disciplined resolve. The Hellcat thus symbolized an enemy approach considered fundamentally inferior to individual bravery and tradition. Intelligence briefings underestimated the aircraft's potential, focusing on visible characteristics rather than operational doctrine. Japanese analysts lacked full understanding of American tactics evolving alongside the Hellcat, including radar coordination and formation fighting that transformed individual aircraft into networked weapons. Psychological momentum played a powerful role, as early war victories had conditioned Japanese aviators to expect dominance. Confidence hardened into dogma, leaving little room to reassess assumptions. The Hellcat's appearance alone failed to trigger alarm, delaying necessary adaptation during a critical transitional period. Even when losses mounted, some pilots blamed circumstances rather than design. They cited numerical disadvantage or poor fuel quality, resisting the idea that an American fighter could outperform the Zero in core combat metrics. Admitting otherwise meant questioning foundational beliefs about air combat. Training culture further reinforced dismissal, as instructors emphasized traditional dogfighting techniques unsuited to Hellcat encounters. Young pilots learned tactics optimized for turning contests, leaving them unprepared for energy fighting where speed, altitude, and firepower dictated outcomes decisively. By the time skepticism began eroding, the cost was severe. Encounters revealed the Hellcat's ability to absorb damage and strike decisively, qualities previously mocked. What seemed laughable weight became lethal resilience, overturning assumptions that had guided Japanese air combat thinking. Mockery faded into uneasy silence as realities asserted themselves in the sky. The Hellcat had never been designed to impress visually, only to win wars. Japanese pilots learned too late that underestimating an enemy's philosophy could be deadlier than misjudging a single aircraft. The Hellcat's defining advantage began with raw power, delivered by the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. Producing over 2,000 horsepower, it transformed speed and climb into weapons rather than luxuries. This surplus energy allowed American pilots to dictate engagements, choosing when to fight or disengage safely. Unlike earlier fighters, the Hellcat embraced weight as protection rather than liability, redefining survivability in combat. Armor plating shielded the cockpit, engine, and fuel systems, absorbing punishment that would destroy lighter aircraft. Pilots could return with holes torn through wings, still alive to fight again. Self-sealing fuel tanks marked another critical departure from Japanese design philosophy, reducing catastrophic fires after hits. Zero pilots relied on evasion, while Hellcat pilots trusted engineering to buy precious seconds. That difference repeatedly meant survival, experience retained, and knowledge carried into subsequent battles. Firepower concentrated destructive force into devastating bursts, with 6 wing-mounted 50-caliber machine guns. These weapons delivered dense streams of tracer and armor-piercing rounds, shredding lightly built opponents rapidly. A brief firing window often proved enough to cripple or instantly destroy enemy aircraft. Ammunition capacity further amplified lethality, allowing sustained combat without immediate disengagement. Hellcat pilots could press attacks confidently, knowing they carried hundreds of rounds per gun. Japanese pilots, limited by smaller reserves, faced shrinking margins as prolonged engagements favored American persistence. Structural strength gave the Hellcat stability as a firing platform, reducing vibration during high-speed attacks. Accurate gunnery became easier, especially in diving passes where control mattered. This stability complemented training that emphasized disciplined firing rather than reckless close-range maneuvering. Speed in level flight and dives exceeded the Zero's capabilities, overturning assumptions about American inferiority. Hellcats could escape unfavorable situations by accelerating away, denying Japanese pilots their preferred turning contests. Control of engagement geometry shifted decisively toward the American side. The Hellcat's rugged landing gear and forgiving handling also mattered operationally, supporting relentless carrier operations. Pilots recovered aboard pitching decks with fewer losses, preserving aircraft and crews. Reliability ensured more fighters available daily, compounding advantages gained in the air. Cockpit ergonomics reflected lessons learned, providing better visibility and instrumentation for situational awareness. Clearer information reduced pilot workload during combat, allowing focus on tactics. Japanese cockpits, simpler but sparse, increasingly felt outdated under modern combat demands. Integrated radio communication strengthened coordination, transforming individual aircraft into cohesive fighting units. Hellcats rarely fought alone, operating within mutually supporting formations. This networked approach multiplied effectiveness, making isolated Japanese pilots vulnerable despite personal skill. Combined power, armor, and firepower created an aircraft designed for winning wars rather than duels. The Hellcat embodied industrial logic, favoring repeatable success over fragile brilliance. Each engagement reinforced that philosophy as results accumulated relentlessly across the Pacific. What Japanese pilots dismissed as heaviness revealed itself as balance, resilience, and controlled violence. The Hellcat was not graceful, but it was decisive. In skies once ruled by elegance, brutal efficiency had arrived, and it would not be displaced. American naval training shifted from individual heroics to coordinated doctrine, emphasizing energy tactics, mutual support, and standardized procedures. Pilots learned to think systemically, flying the Hellcat as part of a carrier air group designed for sustained pressure and repeatable victory. Instead of dogfighting instincts, instruction prioritized altitude advantage, disciplined formations, and boom and zoom attacks. This approach conserved pilots and machines, teaching restraint and timing, while punishing opponents who clung to turning contests, rooted in pre-war assumptions and obsolete doctrines. Training emphasized survival as a strategic asset, reinforcing that returning alive mattered more than personal scores. Instructors drilled emergency procedures, damage management, and decision-making, ensuring experienced aviators accumulated knowledge that magnified effectiveness across entire squadrons during prolonged carrier campaigns. Standardized syllabi replaced improvisation, producing consistent competence regardless of background. Flight hours increased, gunnery practice intensified, and mock combat simulated real conditions, preparing pilots psychologically for chaos while reinforcing trust in equipment, teammates, and command guidance under wartime operational stress. Doctrine integrated intelligence and radar, extending awareness beyond eyesight. Controllers vectored Hellcats toward threats, coordinating interceptions with precision. This networked approach reduced surprise, maximized numerical advantages, and transformed battles into planned engagements rather than spontaneous duels across vast oceanic theaters. Leadership stressed humility and learning, encouraging pilots to report mistakes without stigma. Debriefings analyzed failures rigorously, spreading lessons quickly. This culture accelerated adaptation, ensuring tactics evolved faster than enemies could observe, imitate, or counter effectively during intense Pacific campaigns periods. Carrier air groups trained as integrated teams, synchronizing fighters, bombers, and escorts. Hellcats learned protective roles, shielding strike aircraft and controlling airspace. Victory depended on coordination, not isolated brilliance, reflecting industrial warfare's demands within carrier task force operations during wartime. Physical conditioning and mental resilience received renewed focus, recognizing fatigue's lethal consequences. Training schedules balanced intensity with recovery, preparing pilots for sustained sorties. Endurance enabled consistent performance, preserving judgment when stress and fear threatened catastrophic errors during prolonged carrier deployments. Doctrine deliberately avoided romanticizing combat, reframing success as attrition management. Kill ratios mattered strategically, not emotionally. Pilots were taught patience, choosing favorable odds repeatedly, slowly exhausting opponents whose training pipelines and resources collapsed under sustained American operational pressure across theaters. Standard operating procedures simplified decision-making under fire, reducing cognitive overload. Checklists, brevity codes, and practiced responses minimized hesitation. Hellcat pilots executed doctrine instinctively, freeing attention for tactical awareness and formation discipline during complex, high-tempo carrier battles at sea. American training leveraged industrial-scale cycling replacements through standardized pipelines. Veterans mentored newcomers, embedding habits quickly. This continuity prevented skill collapse, allowing units to absorb losses while maintaining combat effectiveness and confidence across rapidly expanding Pacific operations throughout wartime service. By marrying doctrine to machine, the Navy transformed air combat's logic. The Hellcat became an extension of training philosophy, rewarding discipline over bravado. Against such preparation, enemy skill alone proved tragically insufficient when confronted by systematic American operational mastery globally. Early encounters over Pacific Islands revealed stark contrasts. Japanese pilots laughed at the bulky Hellcat, dismissing it as slow, clumsy, and unworthy. Confidence built on zero victories lingered, yet first clashes exposed unexpected resilience, firepower, and tactics that punished careless approaches. Japanese aviators approached with habitual turning fights, expecting superiority, but Hellcats absorbed damage calmly, holding speed and altitude. Moments later, laughter faded, as concentrated American fire shattered wings, engines failed, and trusted assumptions collapsed violently and suddenly. Survivors fled upward, stunned and silent. Reports from returning pilots spread unease, describing Hellcats diving fast, climbing relentlessly, and refusing the traditional dance of turning combat. Mockery became caution, as squadrons adjusted tactics reluctantly, realizing opponents dictated engagements with brutal efficiency everywhere quickly now. Fear entered briefings, unspoken. Early losses shocked veteran Japanese aces, who had survived China and Pearl Harbor, confronting aircraft they could neither outrun nor outearn. Every failed attack reinforced reality. The Hellcat punished mistakes instantly, leaving little room for heroic improvisation there anymore. Losses mounted rapidly, morale cracking. American pilots remembered initial encounters vividly, recalling disbelief as enemies laughed, then vanished in spirals of smoke below. Confidence grew cautiously, tempered by discipline, as training emphasized patience, teamwork, and calculated aggression consistently everywhere now daily. Success followed preparation, not bravado. Japanese command underestimated cumulative impact, believing losses temporary. Yet Hellcats returned daily, compounding attrition relentlessly everywhere across sectors. Each engagement reduced experienced pilots, while replacements arrived slower, less trained, and increasingly vulnerable overall everywhere now dangerously. Balance shifted decisively, unnoticed until too late. Dogfights ended faster than expected. Hellcats struck from above, fired accurately, and disengaged before retaliation could begin properly. Zeros burned while pilots bailed out, shocked by survivability differences and structural punishment experienced, suddenly everywhere again today. Lessons arrived brutally, written in wreckage. Radio chatter changed tone quickly, confidence replaced with clipped warnings, urging caution against the heavy American fighter now. Veterans advised avoidance, yet engagements remained unavoidable near carriers, airfields, and invasion routes constantly everywhere again there daily. Reality overpowered pride swiftly. For Japanese pilots, first encounters shattered myths, proving enemy adaptation faster than ideology allowed previously imagined possible there. Losses once dismissed became patterns, statistics accumulating despite bravery and skill, shown clearly everywhere now again daily overall. Air war logic had changed. American briefings highlighted encounters cautiously, stressing discipline, as victories validated doctrine rather than chance alone anymore there now. Pilots understood advantage grew from systems, training, and machines working together reliably everywhere daily, now again globally consistently. Humility replaced excitement, survival mattered. Japanese morale eroded steadily, whispers replacing laughter, as pilots faced aircraft immune to previous advantages once trusted widely. First encounters marked beginning of the end, though few recognized scale immediately there, then fully across theaters globally. War momentum quietly shifted. Historians later traced turning points here, where laughter dissolved into loss under relentless Hellcat pressure everywhere suddenly again. First encounters taught unforgiving lessons. Technology and organization now ruled the skies firmly there globally consistently without exception. From mockery came irreversible defeat. June 1944 dawned over the Philippine Sea, with carriers stretching horizon to horizon, American radar screens glowing softly aboard ships. Pilots prepared calmly, unaware history would soon name this battle decisively, as Japanese formations approached believing sacrifice could restore balance once more. Japanese planners committed remaining air strength, launching wave after wave from distant islands and carriers, trusting courage and numbers. Many pilots flew with minimal training, carrying old expectations into skies now ruled by coordinated American detection, interception, and disciplined execution everywhere relentlessly. Radar warnings allowed Hellcat squadrons to climb early, positioning advantageously above incoming raids. Controllers guided fighters precisely, transforming combat into orchestrated defense rather than chaotic duels, leaving Japanese pilots surprised, disorganized, and fatally exposed from first contact onward. Hellcats descended in controlled dives, firing concentrated bursts, then climbing safely away. Japanese formations disintegrated rapidly, planes falling burning into blue seas below. The scale shocked observers, skies filled with parachutes, wreckage, and unanswered distress calls echoing briefly. American pilots described engagement as almost surreal, targets appearing endlessly, resistance collapsing within minutes. Training paid dividends, as wingmen covered each other seamlessly, preventing surprise attacks, conserving energy, and maximizing lethality throughout hours of relentless interception missions. Japanese aviators fought bravely, pressing attacks despite losses, yet tactics proved obsolete. Lacking coordination and protection, they flew into overlapping fire, suffering catastrophic attrition before reaching carrier defenses, leaving bombers scattered, fighters destroyed, and missions shattered completely. Statistics captured devastation starkly, over 300 Japanese aircraft lost against minimal American casualties. The imbalance stunned naval commanders on both sides. Confirming air superiority decisively shifted, not temporarily, but irreversibly toward the United States Navy. Survivors returned shaken. REPORTING Hellcats everywhere, climbing faster, diving harder, absorbing punishment. The Zero's mystique vanished entirely, replaced by fear and resignation. Veteran leaders recognized pilot reserves exhausted, training pipelines broken, and replacement quality dangerously inadequate. American confidence soared cautiously, tempered by awareness victories stemmed from preparation and industry. Carrier decks cycled efficiently, aircraft refueled, rearmed, relaunched repeatedly, demonstrating operational tempo Japan could not match under any circumstances now. The battle ended Japanese carrier aviation as an effective force. Without air cover, fleets became vulnerable, strategic initiative evaporated, and defensive perimeters crumbled steadily. Air superiority now belonged firmly to American forces, shaping every subsequent Pacific operation decisively. Historians later named it the Marianas Turkey Shoot, reflecting lopsided outcome. Yet behind the phrase lay shattered lives, wasted training, and an air arm expended fruitlessly, unable to recover from losses suffered within a single devastating day. From that moment, Japanese pilots understood skies were lost. Courage remained, but means vanished. The Hellcat's dominance, proven conclusively here, ensured American aircraft would fly unchallenged toward Japan, carrying war inexorably closer to home. David McCampbell rose from Indiana farms to Pacific skies. Embodying American training and opportunity, his calm precision forged through repetition and doctrine. Flying Hellcats, he became leading naval ace, yet behind victories lay exhaustion, responsibility, and the quiet knowledge each kill meant another life ended. McCampbell's record-breaking day, destroying 9 enemy aircraft, was celebrated officially, but privately weighed heavily. He described combat as mechanical focus suppressing emotion, because reflection mid-battle invited death. Survival demanded detachment, a cost rarely captured in victory tallies. Across the ocean of experience stood Saburo Sakai, survivor of earlier triumphs, carrying scars physical and psychological. Once master of the Zero, he returned to skies transformed, facing faster enemies, thinner formations, and the loss of comrades he had trained beside. Sakai witnessed attrition hollowing squadrons, veterans dying alongside barely prepared replacements. He recognized bravery persisted, but circumstances changed brutally. Skill without support meant little against coordinated Hellcats. Radar guidance and pilots trained methodically for teamwork rather than individual glory. American aces accumulated victories within systems designed to protect them. Rotations home, medical care, and rest preserved experience. Japanese aces flew until death or incapacitation, symbols of honor yet victims of a structure that consumed expertise faster than it could replace. Attrition became arithmetic, not romance. Each engagement depleted Japan irreversibly, while American losses were absorbed industrially and humanely. Pilots on both sides felt this imbalance, one side gaining confidence, the other flying with resignation masked as determination. McCampbell later acknowledged luck's role, near misses, damaged aircraft limping home. His Hellcat's armor saved him repeatedly, reinforcing gratitude toward engineers and maintainers. Survival was collective achievement, contrasting sharply with enemy pilots whose machines offered little forgiveness. Sakai's memoirs revealed bitterness tempered by clarity. He admired Hellcat pilots' discipline, acknowledging defeat stemmed from systemic failure rather than personal inadequacy. That recognition carried pain, forcing confrontation with myths he once defended unquestioningly through loyalty. Young Japanese pilots entered combat, knowing survival odds were slim. Veterans watched them fall quickly, guilt compounding grief. Attrition eroded morale steadily, transforming missions into fatal obligations rather than tactical endeavors with hope of return. American squadrons mourned losses too, but replacement flow sustained effectiveness. Training emphasized survival as victory, encouraging disengagement when necessary. This philosophy preserved lives, though emotional toll lingered in memories resurfacing long after war's end. The human cost transcended national narratives. Men on both sides aged rapidly, carrying invisible wounds. Aces became symbols, yet beneath accolades and defeat lay individuals shaped permanently by sustained violence and relentless loss in unforgiving skies. Through McCampbell and Sakai, history reveals parallel burdens. Triumph and defeat demanded sacrifices beyond statistics. Their reflections underscore warfare's truth that machines and doctrines decide outcomes, while humans endure consequences that echo long after engines fall silent. American factories reshaped the Pacific War quietly, relentlessly, assembly lines humming far from combat zones. Steel, aluminum, and labor converged into aircraft faster than pilots could be trained. creating a reserve of power that transformed losses into temporary setbacks rather than strategic disasters. Grumman's production of the Hellcat exemplified this advantage, delivering over 12,000 aircraft within 30 months. Each airframe represented standardized design, interchangeable parts, and predictable performance, allowing squadrons to maintain strength despite combat attrition that would have crippled less industrialized nations. Japanese industry struggled under bombing, shortages, and fragmented logistics. Skilled labor vanished into uniformed ranks, factories lacked materials, and transportation faltered. Aircraft production slowed steadily, forcing commanders to ration planes, limit training flights, and accept declining quality as inevitable. Flight hours told a parallel story of imbalance. Early war Japanese pilots trained extensively, often exceeding 700 hours. By 1944, replacements arrived with fewer than 40, barely capable of basic maneuvers, thrust prematurely into lethal combat against seasoned opponents. American training pipelines expanded alongside factories. Pilots accumulated hundreds of hours, practiced gunnery, formation tactics, and carrier landings repeatedly. Mistakes occurred safely in training fields, not fatal engagements, preserving human capital as carefully as industrial output. Industry supported doctrines seamlessly. Damaged Hellcats were repaired rapidly, engines replaced, armor patched. Maintenance crews benefited from standardized manuals and abundant spares, ensuring aircraft returned quickly to service, sustaining pressure that Japanese forces could not reciprocate. Japan's reliance on individual skill faltered against this system. Even exceptional pilots required functioning machines and prepared wingmen. As industry failed, skill became isolated, unable to influence outcomes when numerical inferiority and mechanical unreliability dictated engagement terms. American commanders understood replacement arithmetic clearly. Losses were acceptable if objectives advanced, knowing factories compensated swiftly. This calculus, grim yet pragmatic, allowed aggressive operations, gradually suffocating Japanese aviation through sustained pressure rather than singular decisive duels. The Hellcat symbolized industrial philosophy. It forgave errors, absorbed damage, and returned pilots alive. Design prioritized survival over elegance, reflecting an understanding that preserving trained airmen multiplied effectiveness far beyond any single sortie's success. Japanese aircraft design emphasized performance margins, sacrificing armor and fuel protection. This choice amplified losses once industrial support collapsed. Planes burned, pilots died, and irreplaceable experience vanished, accelerating decline regardless of courage displayed. Factories also produced confidence. American pilots launched, knowing replacements waited, morale strengthened by logistical certainty. Japanese aviators flew aware losses were final, anxiety shadowing bravery, eroding cohesion long before surrender became inevitable. Ultimately, factories defeated flight hours. Industrial endurance overwhelmed tradition, proving modern war favored systems over heroes. The Pacific skies bore witness, as production lines thousands of miles away decided battles pilots could only endure, not influence. The legacy of the F6F Hellcat transcended its role as a fighter aircraft, reshaping the Pacific Air War through a combination of technological innovation, pilot training, and industrial strategy that left Japanese forces unable to recover despite years of combat experience and tactical skill. Its design embodied lessons learned from early war failures, emphasizing durability, firepower, and ease of production, which allowed the United States Navy to field overwhelming numbers and sustain prolonged operations across vast oceanic theaters where attrition had previously dictated strategic caution. The Hellcat's impact extended beyond kill ratios, influencing naval aviation doctrine permanently. Carrier tactics evolved to incorporate coordinated strikes, radar-guided interceptions, and massed formations that leveraged Hellcat strengths while minimizing individual pilot vulnerability, transforming air combat into a science of combined force rather than isolated duels. Japanese aces, once confident in the Zero's agility, faced a disorienting reality as the Hellcat neutralized maneuver advantages and punished aggressive dogfighting approaches, demonstrating that superior technology combined with disciplined tactics could redefine combat paradigms entirely. The aircraft's success accelerated the collapse of Japanese pilot training as attrition forced replacements into battle prematurely, creating a vicious cycle where inexperienced aviators faced mechanized precision, further tipping the balance in favor of American forces and rendering previously lethal strategies ineffective. Industrial output amplified the Hellcat's influence, showing that warfare increasingly depended on logistical endurance rather than individual heroism, as thousands of airframes, engines, and spare parts created resilience against losses that older doctrines could not accommodate. Veterans like David McCampbell and Saburo Sakai testified to the psychological shock inflicted by Hellcats, revealing how enemy pilots were forced into defensive operations and cautious engagement, fundamentally altering morale and initiative within the Japanese air forces during critical campaigns. The Marianas Turkey Shoot epitomized this transformation, demonstrating that coordinated Hellcat operations could annihilate large formations with minimal American losses, illustrating a new principle. Technological and tactical integration could achieve decisive outcomes in ways previously impossible in aerial warfare. Hellcat performance influenced post-war aircraft development worldwide, with designers prioritizing armor, engine power, and multi-role flexibility while balancing pilot survivability, ensuring that lessons from the Pacific carried forward into Cold War aviation planning and carrier strategy. Its legacy also shaped military education, emphasizing combined arms, industrial planning, and pilot training as inseparable factors in determining success, influencing both doctrine and procurement policies for decades beyond the final surrender in 1945. Culturally, the Hellcat became a symbol of American ingenuity, resilience, and the ability to convert adversity into advantage, inspiring literature, documentaries, and veteran accounts that reinforce the broader narrative of technological supremacy and modern conflict. Ultimately, the F6F Hellcat redefined the Pacific Air War, proving that superior engineering, systematic training, and industrial capacity could decisively outmatch individual skill and bravery, establishing a model of aerial dominance that reshaped naval aviation strategy for generations to come.